The Last of Us Part 2 is full of some incredible side stories, and one of these could give HBO's The Last of Us Season 2 its new Bill and Frank episode. The Last of Us Episode 3 is one of the most critically acclaimed from the HBO show's first batch of episodes, with it taking a break from Joel and Ellie's quest to focus on the plight of two lovers in the apocalypse. Although this episode was a departure from The Last of Us Season 1's formula, it was a massive success, something that Season 2 needs to replicate. The Last of Us Season 2 is now in development, with the highly anticipated continuation of HBO's critically acclaimed adaptation of the game of the same name now being closer than ever. While The Last of Us Season 1 adapted the events of the first game, The Last of Us Season 2 will be adapting the events of the controversial sequel, The Last of Us Part 2. Although The Last of Us Part 2 is undoubtedly more divisive than its predecessor, it has some moments that are universally agreed upon to be fantastic, and one needs to be adapted by HBO. The Last of Us Season 2 needs to include Boris's story. If The Last of Us Season 2 wants to recreate the success of Season 1's Bill and Frank episode, then it really needs to adapt Boris's story. In The Last of Us Part 2, Ellie finds notes and other collectibles that reference the story of a character named Boris Legislav. Boris was a resident of Seattle's Hillcrest suburb, with his daughter Sophia being killed by the Washington Liberation Front after making protest art. In retaliation, Boris equipped a bow and became a vigilante, hunting down WLF members and evading captivity during the nights in Seattle. Although several side stories are told through these collectibles throughout the events of The Last of Us Part 2, Boris's is by far the most fleshed out. Thus, if Season 2 wants to adapt any of these stories for the TV show, then Boris's arc is a prime candidate. Boris's story is a fan-favorite storyline that The Last of Us Season 2 could include, but since it is only told through collectibles, the HBO show will have to show Boris rather than letting this arc play out off-screen. Why Boris's story is essential to Ellie's TLOU2 arc. Boris's story is essential to Ellie's arc in The Last of Us Part 2, which is why it is important for the HBO show to include it. Boris's story ends with him becoming infected and being turned into a zombie that Ellie later has to fight. Boris, much like Ellie, was on a mission of revenge. Boris's story ties into the themes of The Last of Us Part 2 by showing that revenge, no matter how just, will always lead to self-destruction, with Boris's quest to take down the WLF causing him to become infected and lose his life. Having Ellie fight Boris later in the season also further advances the idea that everyone infected with the Last of Us cordyceps virus was once a human, making them much deeper than typical movie and TV zombies. Having a sympathetic hero like Boris get turned into a mindless antagonist will reinforce this dark idea, keeping the thought that infected are human at the forefront of audiences' minds. Boris's story also makes the audience hate the WLF even more, making Ellie's motives more understandable. The Last of Us Bill and Frank episode shows how to adapt Boris's story. Bill, Nick Offerman, speaking to Frank, Murray Bartlett, in The Last of Us Episode 3. The Last of Us Season 1's Bill and Frank episode gives the perfect framework for adapting stories like Boris's, something that Season 2 should learn from. Although Bill and Frank have an entire episode dedicated to them in Season 1, their relationship was only told through collectibles in the original game. Even though Joel and Ellie meet Bill, Bill's love for Frank is only barely touched on, with the HBO series expanding on this through a flashback episode. The Last of Us Season 2 should give Boris the same treatment, with him possibly getting his own flashback episode. Boris's story of loss and revenge is easily enough to warrant his own special episode, with it adding a lot to the series. The reception to Bill and Frank's story in The Last of Us Season 1 showed that these special episodes are a hit with fans, and Boris is a fantastic candidate for the same treatment in The Last of Us Season 2.